A cutscene begins to roll and reveals a planet under siege, being attacked from orbit. A battle is being fought between UNSC and ex-Covenant ships. Orbital defense platforms fall as the view moves closer to the planet. The Covenant ships release waves of attack craft and dropship that quickly engage with UNSC forces and begin their descent to the surface. We fly with them as they pass hulking wrecks from UNSC and ex-Covenant ships, and as several CCS-class battlecruisers descend through the upper atmosphere, heat from re-entry kissing the ship's shields, causing them to flare. The camera accelerates ahead and we now see dropships slowing and laying siege to the sprawling metropolis, now deeper in the atmosphere. Buildings are on fire, some collapse. UNSC drones engage the attackers and anti-aircraft guns thin out the forces, but there's just too many. We descend to one of the AA guns as it fires on an inbound flight of dropships, but it is engaged from the side by Seraph fighters, and as the gun is damaged beyond repair, Covenant infantry storm the AA emplacement and slay its human operators. The dropships scream overhead and descend to the surface, where we watch them deploy dozens of Covenant troops as well as wraiths and ghosts as they continue to lay siege to the city. The camera now flies through the streets of the city, seeing the destruction and chaos as UNSC Marines fight gallantly but hopelessly against overwhelming odds. Civilians are ushered through an intersection as they're flanked by Covenant forces. Several ODST drop pods smash into the tarmac and a squad of ODSTs deploy to help repel the alien invaders. They provide covering fire as the civilians are herded into the hatch of a Pelican, which promptly takes off and begins to rise amongst the buildings before being blown out of the sky by a plasma beam from one of the CCS-class battlecruisers above. The camera continues to bob and weave through the streets until it rises and skims the signs above a highway where a Scorpion tank and several Warthogs engage wraiths and some ghosts. Yet, on the other side of the highway, a Scarab impacts from orbital deployment, rises and tramples over the highway, causing it to collapse and the human forces to perish. The camera watches as it falls and pivots and begins gliding across a body of water. The camera pans up to reveal a space elevator port with the highway arching into view, stretching out from the coast towards the spaceport. The camera finally closes on the accessway to the space tether to reveal the gates are being overrun by Covenant forces, and amongst the chaos and fighting, the camera reveals a Spartan, stood tall and proud amongst the vitriol of war. But this Spartan is instantly familiar. This is Spartan June A266, wearing his characteristic armour but with the telltale signs of a Gen 3 upgrade. He engages an elite with his combat knife, using his superior strength to manhandle the hapless soldier into a negative position, and then promptly executes the elite before cleaning his blade and resheathing it. Several other Spartans flank him as the camera zooms into his visor. The player now takes control. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and given the news going on about what's going on behind the scenes regarding the development of future Halo projects, I've been thinking more and more about the stories that could be told within the Halo universe. I mean, the Halo universe is a huge and expansive universe with huge amounts of stories to call upon, and with rumours and conversations inexorably turning to the idea that perhaps 343 Industries should become a franchise holder and start leasing the Halo IP out to other studios to develop other games. It got me thinking about the wealth and breadth of stories that could be told in game format that I know we as the fans would absolutely love. So with the content drought the way that it is at the moment, I'm starting something of a loose series that will basically be me exploring narratively what stories could be told in spin-off games that could be developed by third-party studios. And today, for your consideration, I want to deliver to you my kind of full plot synopsis of what I think would be a really good spin-off game for the Halo franchise, centered around June, the sole survivor of Noble Team from Halo Reach. The scene described at the start of this video would have been the opening prologue or opening cutscene of this new game, and then with the player taking control of June, we would begin the first level of this new game with the working title Orbital. Now, picking up where we left off with the player taking control of June in the spaceport of the space elevator, flanked by several other Spartans, the objective of this first mission is to work with the Spartan 4s under his command to help evacuate civilians whilst repelling Covenant forces at the space tether. Gameplay involves being sent to various locations around the spaceport to deploy security measures to slow down the Covenant's advance, set up defensive batteries, and help escort arriving civilian evacuees into the spaceport whilst being continually engaged by Covenant reinforcements. After a while of holding the Covenant at bay, one of the CCS-class battlecruisers that had been glassing the city now emerges above the city's skyline and is headed to the space tether. Forces begin overwhelming the spaceport, and the Spartans, led by June, or the player in this instance, must retreat inside and hold position while civilians load into the next couple of lift cars, again having to fight back Covenant forces as they enter the spaceport from numerous locations. Once the civilians are all evac'd, the next lift car moves into position and the Spartans board, but it doesn't move. The city's logistics AI that's currently in charge of the space tether informs them that the space tether is already at capacity and that they risk bringing the tether down if they put another car on the wire. The Spartans must hunker down and face down a final wave of Covenant forces, almost like a firefight boss wave at this point. But this time, created forces arrive. It seems that Cortana's created have convinced the Covenant species to work with her. After holding back the created loyal Covenant forces, the AI instructs that the car can now depart. The Spartans get aboard and the lift quickly rises, revealing the devastation to the city below. Before long, the lift car is in space and the true extent of the damage to the colony can be seen below. After some somber conversation between the Spartans, the lift car arrives at the terminus, a geostationary orbital facility where the evacuees are already boarding ships to leave the colony. The AI informs the Spartans that no more evacuees will be leaving the planet via the space tether, as they're all dead. Some terminals and peripheral information about the situation can be found across this station. It becomes obvious that someone or something has been trying to access the station's systems. The Spartans ensure the station is clear of civilians before moving towards the ship to extract. Before they get there, the station shakes violently. Many of the docked ships quickly disengage and begin flying clear, but a few still attached show signs of damaged seals and leaking atmosphere from boarding umbilicals. The station goes eerily quiet. June inquires with the AI what that was. The AI comes back with a necessary sacrifice. One of the Spartans doesn't like the sound of that and inquires further. The AI reveals that it is now aligned with Cortana and her created, and that humanity's resistance is born of an overconfidence in their warriors, the Spartans, and that the best way to force humanity to comply is to disarm them entirely. Spartans are weapons, and weapons must be removed. The station again shakes violently as the screens in the station display warnings that the tether is unstable and in a compromised state, and to evacuate the station immediately. With civilians still on board, the Spartans have to buy some time, so they quickly move to the station's bridge where the bridge crew have been killed by venting the atmosphere. The Spartans move towards the bridge controls to attempt to take control of the station and prevent the AI from causing further issue. Promethean knights and soldiers translocate onto the bridge, slowing their advance. The Spartans group up too much. June orders them to spread out and flank. They begin to comply, but one is cut down by a knight, causing the other two to somewhat panic and clear the area, not thinking to maintain cover where needed. Another's shields get chipped away, and another knight translocates into their midst and restrains them. June and the remaining Spartan must then engage the Promethean forces and clear the bridge, before saving the restrained squad mate, before then turning to resume their objective, but they don't get to the terminal in time before the AI succeeds in overloading the tether, causing it to break, releasing the orbital terminus from its hold and catapulting it out into space. Ships break free and begin venting atmosphere. The explosive decompression sucks remaining civilians into space, the Spartans included, and they begin tumbling into the void of space. June's voice cuts in, and the scene freezes still. He explains that the mission failed because the Spartans forgot their training. They grouped up too close, making them easier to take out, and when one Spartan fell, the others panicked and overcompensated, ultimately costing them the mission. June aborts the mission, and the scene fades to black as June sits up from a wargame simulation bay, his fellow Spartans sitting up around him. The entire first mission was a wargame simulation. June explains they still need a little work, but they got really close this time. June stands up, wearing his uniform now, and makes his way out of the wargame simulation room. The game title screen fades in. June begins walking his way through the hallways of Laconia Station, the training facility for Spartan 4s. He is hailed by the station's AI, Leonidas, a disembodied Greek Spartan helmet with visible eyes and teeth, who gives him an update on the station, informing him that a few new arrivals of Spartan 4s was due in the next few days, and encouraged June to rest as he'd been awake for multiple days following reports of Cortana's uprising and the created conflict. June had ordered the entire station onto high alert, also ordering radio silence so it's unlikely that the station would be found by created forces, and ordered the Spartan 4s to go through numerous wargame simulations to train them for a conflict with created forces. It had been this that had taken up the lion's share of June's time in recent days. As June arrives at his office, he initially resists the idea of taking rest. Leonidas then inquires what it was like putting on the armour again. June dismissed it and said that he didn't, it was a simulation, but Leonidas presses the subject. June sits back in his chair and explains that it felt good, but it also felt wrong, somehow. He retrieves a wooden box from the desk drawer, and on its surface is Noble Team's logo. June contemplates the box for a moment, and then returns it to its drawer. June is evidently settled into his new life, in an administrative and training capacity with the Spartan branch, but still obviously feels some kind of way about being somewhat active duty without the rest of Noble Team. Suddenly he feels exhausted. He says to Leonidas he might actually rest for a little while after all. Leonidas assures him that they'll maintain radio silence for outbound communications and keep the station safe from Cortana, saying he'd wake him if anything urgent came up. June nods in acceptance and begins to settle down in his office, and his office door seals down with a hiss, and the access light changing from green to red. We fade out with level 1 being completed and level 2 beginning, titled Alpha 9. This level begins with a ship docking to Laconia Station and the doors sheathing open, granting access to the station itself, at which point Spartan Edward Buck, wearing his Mjolnir Gen 2 platform, walks aboard the Laconia Station. Following the reveal of the created uprising, Buck had been tasked with reuniting Alpha 9. He had already rescued Romeo from the grunt homeworld Balaho, and rescued Sadie Endisher and the Huragok known as Virgil from a secret Oni facility on Luna, before arriving at Laconia Station to release Michael Mickey Crespo from the brig aboard Laconia Station. He had been imprisoned here following his defection to the United Rebel Front. This mission plays out very much in line with the events of the book Halo Bad Blood, with Buck confronting Mickey with anger and even considering just leaving him behind entirely. Buck suspects at this stage that the station's AI, Leonidas, was also likely compromised due to the created uprising. Buck requests to see June, but is denied by Leonidas, prompting Buck to decide to try to shut down the station's AI. This prompts Leonidas to attempt to stop Buck, going so far as to declare him a rogue Spartan, which leads to a series of engagements where Buck has to use less than lethal force against fellow Spartans attempting to stop him, including one particular scene where Buck is being escorted by 3 Spartans, and upon Leonidas declaring stolen gauntlet and saying that Buck had gone AWOL, the Spartans pulled their weapons on him, which he then quickly tried to convince them to stand down as it was likely that Leonidas had gone rogue. And as he managed to get them to begin questioning June's whereabouts, Leonidas vents the air in the room, suffocating the 3 Spartans. The mission continues in being able to extract Mickey from the brig while also having some unexpected help from Dutch and Gretchen, his wife, both of whom were training on the station. Buck ultimately orders Dutch and Gretchen to escort Mickey back to the ship, while he attempts to take Leonidas offline. Buck then ultimately makes his way to June's office, where he punches his way into the office. It is at this point that it is revealed that Leonidas had been keeping the oxygen level in June's office dangerously low, keeping June in an unconscious state, with Leonidas at this point threatening that if he didn't surrender he would open every single one of the station's airlocks and kill everybody aboard the station. Before Leonidas could give a 3-second countdown, Virgil managed to shut down the power to many of the station's systems, effectively preventing Leonidas from accessing the systems. Buck managed to make it inside of June's office, and before Leonidas attempted to reason with him, Buck removed his AI data chip from the terminal in June's office. Buck checks June's vital signs and ascertains that he is in fact alive, and then briefly reasons as to whether or not it's worth not destroying Leonidas, before ultimately deciding to drop the chip to the floor and grinding it beneath his boots. As Buck leaves June's office, a very brief flash of Leonidas' avatar winks on one of the displays on June's desk. This level ends with Buck returning to the ship, now reunited with most of the members of Alpha 9, and disembarking from the Laconia station. And so begins Level 3. This mission's cutscene begins with June waking up inside of his office, being given information about what happened from other Spartans, and informed of a missing prisoner. He boots up his security system on his computer in his office, and sees the security feed showing Spartan Buck extracting. He tells the Spartans with him to make ready to leave the station, and the Spartans leave, and June contacts Buck. Again, very much in line with what happened in Bad Blood, June asks Buck if he removed one of his prisoners and had taken care of the rogue AI, causing Buck to get a little evasive regarding these particular questions, with June continuing to say that removing a prisoner from the station without permission was ultimately an offence worthy of a court-martial. Buck sidesteps the questions once more and warns June that the AI problem that they just experienced with Leonidas is actually part of a much larger problem, with threats that could be very quickly approaching the station. June reassures Buck that they're already making preparations to move to a completely new location, and then June finally relaxes and says that he just wanted to make sure that Buck got what he had come for, with June then citing the line from Halo ODST, "Desperate times call for desperate measures." June wishes Buck good luck, to which Buck responds, "You too," before cutting communication. At this point, the fragment of Leonidas still within the systems then takes over training bots, the ones we initially saw in the art of Halo Infinite. These bots exist in the lore now, and are now ultimately being controlled by Leonidas, although June and the other Spartans on the station assume that it's just Cortana's created somehow, likely motivated by Buck's very recent warning. As the security feeds show these bots engaging Spartans across the station, June realizes that the best way that he can help protect his fellow Spartans is to once again put on his armor, something he had been somewhat actively avoiding for quite a while. He walks across to a keypad on the wall and types in a passcode, Noble 3. A seamless door opens, and beyond is a Gen 3 variant of his armor mounted in a compact broker armor mechanism. June takes off his uniform, dons a Spartan BDU, and climbs into the broker mechanism, armoring up for the first time in years. The level then begins with June in his armor fighting off the bots and getting his Spartans to various evacuation stations ready in case they needed to abandon ship. It's at this point he's informed that some of the bots seem to be attempting to access the station's command center or bridge, likely to seize control of the station. The rest of this level plays out with June and his fellow Spartans making their way to the command station to prevent the training bots, or training mechs, from doing whatever it is they plan to do, ultimately fighting across various parts of the station, very much in line to what we experience with Cairo Station in Halo 2, but somewhat in reverse, getting back to the bridge or the command center, where they succeed in stopping the bots from seizing control of the station. Article 55, being level 4 of this campaign, picks up where we left off with June and the other Spartans on the command deck of the Laconia station. The bridge feeds reveal that bots are being controlled via a node network that needs to be shut down so that preparations for leaving can resume. In the primary hangar bay, there are large logistic robot platforms, created by Jotun Heavy Industries, which are designed to help load and unload large amounts of industrial freight quickly. However, since the station has been taken over by what June and the other Spartans assume to be the Created, these large logistic robots are now massive, rogue, almost insurmountable robotic platforms that could pummel even a Spartan into dust. These Jotuns and the other bots across the station make it impossible to continue getting ready to leave the station for a new location. The only way that the Spartans can guarantee that they'll be able to extract from the station is by shutting these bots down. So this mission involves tracking the node network through the station node by node. And of course, without the assistance of an AI that can tap into these systems, this is very much a manual job, calling upon June's clearance to restricted areas along with some of the crew of the Laconia station's knowledge of its systems. This plays out like a kind of VIP style game, where June and the other Spartans have to defend the experts who know the system in order to track the nodes from place to place, shutting them down as they go. They follow the nodes and proxy servers across the station, trying to find its source so that they can shut it down, taking the bots offline and clearing the way for extraction. The mission sees having to constantly fight back bots and some minor automated defense systems and find routes around blocked paths, all while simultaneously defending the VIP from being injured. Think the portion of the Truth and Reconciliation when we recover Captain Keyes and get him back to the hangar bay. It's that, but drawn out into a larger mission. Near the end of the mission, they get to a node that's being rerouted through the Wargames simulation deck, and inside there are too many mechanized bots to safely get the VIP into the area, meaning June has to go in alone. The closing cutscene comes to an end as June steps through the doors into the Wargames simulation. Level 5 sees June on the Wargames simulation deck, and a simulation begins while he's inside. The simulation puts him through numerous disorientating environments, fighting against these mechanized sparring bots. But with the simulations in play, it makes it seem like he's fighting the Covenant, the Created, other humans, even Spartans that he has trained and knows on Laconia Station. June's task is fighting off these miraged, simulated opponents as he moves around the simulation deck, finding terminals and reroute positions to gain access to the node in the center of the room. In an attempt to distract June, the simulation changed, revealing the last fight of Alpha Company, of which June was once a member before being reassigned. Operation Prometheus was basically the suicide mission that Alpha Company was sent on, and while it slightly bothered June, it wasn't enough to slow him down in his objective. The final simulated environment is generated and is revealed to be Reach. Members of Noble Team reappear. At this point, June is somewhat lost in the simulation. The sight of his team coming back is too much to think entirely clearly. When June resists and remembers his objective, the Noble Team members morph into damaged, dead and reanimated versions of themselves, injured in the same way that they were in the game. These twisted, reanimated versions of his teammates then taunt him, before ultimately breaking out into a conflict where June has to fight these spectres of his teammates. It starts with Kat, then Emil, and then Carter, then Noble 6, then to George, and finally to a version of himself. The version that he feels should have died on Reach with the others. This wrestles with themes of survivor's guilt and the evident distress that June has been carrying with him that all of Noble Team died in the defense of Reach, except for himself. After an extended battle that feels a little bit like a boss battle, June manages to win against this visage of himself and body slams his alternate self into the ground with such force it damages the deck plates, the simulation around the body now glitching and broken. He pins his alternate self and begins beating it to pieces, revealing it to just be another bot, and further damaging the deck plates to short-circuit the system, causing the simulation to shut down. He rises, now at peace, both literally in that he has no other opponents to fight, but also figuratively at peace with his survivor's guilt, taking full ownership of his new life rather than hiding from who he once was, and ultimately should once again become. He activates the final terminal and tracks the node to its source, and shuts it down. The bots disactivate and preparations to leave can resume. Following the Wargame simulation deck, June isn't entirely convinced that the created would know the information about himself and his past to be able to project such simulations to taunt him the way that he was. It seemed that whomever was behind this particular manipulation knew June a little bit more personally than he had initially considered. Preparations to leave the station are nearly complete when Leonidas, or the fragment of himself that's still in the systems, reveals himself. Now the prior mission makes sense. Leonidas would have had access to June's records and would have likely been observing June for a very long time, realizing that he possesses some degree of survivor's guilt. He may have even hacked into and found records of his after-action reports from Reach, attempting to use this information to manipulate him. June, knowing full well that now a fragment of Leonidas is still on Laconia Station, must pursue him through the station to find him and destroy him once and for all, to ultimately prevent Leonidas carrying through on his earlier promises to kill everyone on the station. June pursues him through the station down into the bowels of the station and to its power source, a fusion reactor in the base. There is a face-off between June and the automated defences preventing June from purging the fragment out of the system. Some automated defence turrets, security doors and emergency containment barriers must be overcome as it becomes apparent that Leonidas is beginning to overload the fusion reactor that powers the station. June then realises in order to avoid the reactor being overloaded, he has to enter into the reactor chamber. Inside, the nuclear fusion reaction is being sustained within a containment field high in the centre of the room. Around the edges of the room, magnetic confinement panels can be adjusted and fine-tuned to keep the reaction stable. These panels are now being moved and altered to impede June's progress, and in doing so begins to destabilise the fusion reaction and cause arcs of electricity and plasma that almost feel like they're being directed towards him. June makes it to the far side of the reactor chamber, where he desperately attempts to bring online redundant and emergency systems to vent the overloading reactor, while still fighting off automated defences until he ultimately realises it's futile. He retreats to a reinforced engineering room that connects to the reaction chamber, where he accesses station-wide communication systems and orders immediate evacuation of the station, but it's too late. The reaction goes critical and the station blows up, throwing June out into space, saving him only by the fact that he was within the reinforced engineering room, but nevertheless punching a hole clean through the wall. Now floating through space, his armour compensates his tumble and he collides with some debris, finding a handhold and stabilising himself. He scans the environment for friendly IFFs to find that there are currently none within his range. His armour doesn't have the power level for that range of detection, but perhaps there's a pelican nearby that he can find and get aboard, and perhaps try again. He navigates through the debris field and finds one and approaches it. A slipspace rupture ripples space nearby as seemingly a Covenant Sinaris class destroyer, except this one has been altered somewhat by the created. This is a created commanded ship, and it arrives in the debris field, evidently looking for something. June gets aboard the Pelican, and so ends Mission 6. Aboard the Pelican, June's priorities have now shifted. The created have arrived in the debris field of Laconia Station and are evidently looking for something, and he has to find out what they're looking for, aware that they wouldn't commit such a large vessel for simply looking for and executing survivors. After piloting the Pelican at lowest possible energy levels to avoid detection, June makes his way towards the hangar bay of the destroyer. He sets the Pelican down on the deck plates and immediately begins his search for the bridge, where he hopes to find information on what they're looking for. In a similar manner to the level Truth and Reconciliation, June moves through the ship, killing created forces as he goes, ultimately finding his way to the bridge, where he finds that the created are looking for the location data of other Spartan training stations, particularly the sister stations of the Laconia, the Naxos and Virgo stations. June knows that there were two locations that information existed. One was on the command deck of the Laconia station, and the other was concealed in his office. He uses the destroyer's sensor network to scan the debris field of Laconia Station to see if he can ascertain whether or not the command center is still even partially intact. It is not. When the reactor went critical, it blew the top clean off of the station and vaporized the command center, meaning there's only one location that information may have survived. June brings the Pelican in relatively close to a large section of debris from Laconia Station. He jumps out of the Pelican's hold and floats through space before colliding with this large section. He makes his way across the hull plating and then inside, where he then makes his way through the spaces inside, evading or engaging with created that are skulking through this ruin, looking for the data. This is a much darker, more ambient level, lit only really by emergency lighting, and almost entirely in the vacuum of space, being held to the decks mainly by his magnetic boots. He moves through the dark and damaged corridors, killing patrolling and searching created as he goes, until he finds his office. He wrenches the door open, and part of the room is missing entirely, but there, floating in the corner, caught up in a mess of cables, is the box with the Noble logo on the top of it. He retrieves it and opens it up. Inside, replicas of Noble Team's dog tags can be found. Obviously the original ones would have been lost with the members of Noble Team, but he had these ones made in memory of them. A photo of Noble Team taken together from one of the surveillance cameras on Reach is also inside of this box, as well as an after-action report of Noble Team's actions. All of this can be viewed in-game. Finally, there's a data chip that contains the data regarding the other stations. He slots it into his helmet, stuffs Noble's dog tags down into his armor, and goes to leave. Suddenly he's overrun with created. He attempts to fight them off, but there are too many, and when it all seems futile, 3 other Spartans burst into the room via the missing section of the wall and fight by June's side to repel the created. These 3 Spartans are some of the same Spartans that were in the simulation with him at the beginning of the game. Having seemingly learnt from their mistakes in the simulations, they work together and extract to a Pelican and send out a ping for friendly IFFs, which draws attention to their location, and the created ship begins moving to engage. But before this can happen, another slipspace rupture ripples in space on the starboard side of the created destroyer, and from it emerges a banished dreadnought, slamming into its side and splitting the ship in 2. Mission 9 shows the Pelican being brought aboard the banished dreadnought into one of the hangar bays. The ramp to the Pelican's bay descends, and the 3 Spartans with June enter the hangar bay of the banished dreadnought. They are surrounded by banished brutes, and are captured and escorted to the bridge to the Packmaster. The Packmaster welcomes the Spartans aboard his ship, which just so happens to be warship Gabrakan, and after the Packmaster delivering some rhetoric regarding the banished and their freedom from Cortana's rule, the fact that they will not kneel or be ruled by either the prophets or the created, they also acknowledge that the Spartans are also not their friends, with the banished again being in seemingly the same opinion that the Spartans are the major problem with humanity, and if the Spartans are destroyed, humanity will no longer be a threat. The decision is made to imprison the Spartans and torture them for information as to the location of other Spartan strongholds and any information regarding Cortana and her location. As they are moved from the bridge en route to the brig, June manages to slip free and hide away aboard the immense ship. He then has to go about the process of releasing his fellow Spartans from imprisonment whilst avoiding being captured himself. This plays out not dissimilarly to Gravemind from Halo 2, when Master Chief goes and releases the Marines from the cells in High Charity. After fighting through the ship, he makes his way to the brig, and June finds the other Spartans and releases them. The difference here, however, is that they are no longer armoured up. They have had their armour forcibly removed, so the Spartans are actually only wearing their BDUs. And this is when the final leg of their plan is to escape the ship and get out of the system as fast as possible. The final level begins with a cutscene that merges almost perfectly with the prior cutscene from the previous mission, where the Spartans plan to escape the ship by commandeering a condor, which is effectively a slipspace capable pelican that just so happens to have been captured by the Banished and is being held in one of the hangar bays. The mission begins with June in his full Mjolnir armour and the Spartans wearing their BDUs fighting through the ship, making their way to the hangar bays. Inevitably, not all of the Spartans make it, but it does include a Warthog run moment aboard the ship, as the ship is such a huge vessel. During the final moments of this Warthog run, the Warthog is struck in the side by a skewer which causes the Warthog to tumble, throwing the occupants free. This somewhat injures June, and as he manages to get himself back up, he is shot at and his armour is breached. His Spartans pull together to give him some cover while his energy shields recharge. After the Warthog run, with some of the other Spartans taking other alternate routes to get to the hangar bay, they all reunite in the hangar bay, which is full of junk but also the functional Condor, and they have to hold off Banished forces while the Condor is started up. Once it's ready, they all get aboard, but it becomes obvious that the Condor can't physically leave the hangar bay while the energy barriers on the hangar bay doors are still active, which means someone has to go and release them. June opts to go back in and release the energy barriers on the doors to give his Spartans a fighting chance of escaping. Numerous brutes and even some hunters enter the hangar bay in gear that allows them to operate in vacuum, and they begin using heavy weapons to fire upon the Condor. At this point, June has little choice. There's no point in attempting to vent the hangar bay and then release the doors. The only way really to guarantee that his Spartans will survive is to explosively vent the hangar bay. He hits the button and watches as the Banished forces are sucked out into space, as is the Condor lifted off the deck and thrown into the void, and then he himself is pulled off of his feet and thrown into space. His armour once again stabilises his tumble, but then trickles of blood can be seen freeze-drying in space. June's breached suit means that he's not going to survive being in space for very long. The edges of his vision darken and narrow, and in between fighting blacking out, the Condor can be seen coming to a stop nearby. Through narrowing vision and waning consciousness, June climbs his way through the junk and debris and makes his way to the airlock of the Condor, slipping inside, saving himself from the void. The inner airlock cycles and June collapses onto the deck of the Condor, surrounded by his Spartans. They remove his helmet and he takes gasping breaths of fresh air. The Condor spools up and quickly jumps away from the system via slipspace. The credits roll, and then we are greeted with a post-credit scene which shows the Condor arriving at an uncharted planet, diving through the atmosphere, and then coming to hover above a landing zone at the Avery J. Johnson Academy of Military Science, and being greeted by Commander Agrina. And that about does it for my take on a plot synopsis for a spin-off game following June and his escape from Laconia Station as it was destroyed at the hands of the Created, whilst also simultaneously wrapping it nicely into the plot points of Halo Infinite with Warship Gabrakan, the Created, the Banished, and paving the way for future stories to be told. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this played out and if you'd like to play something like this. And hell, I know there's some extremely talented people out there that could probably use the Forge system in Halo Infinite to create much of what I've just explained. So if you do, make sure you let me know, because I'd love to showcase it here on the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Be sure to like the video if you did, and pop a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Sylphia, Mikhail, Ashley, Jordan and Esoteric Sight, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Legions Lost, Labrat, Spartan0137, Jacob Kemp, Sean, Element Zero, J3, Mr. Keys, Gunslinger, Evermore, Personal Devil, Aldiaz, Toxic, Scion Esports, Gem Saber and Relentless, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who continue to support the channel. If you want your name on the end of the video and some perks earned along the way, head over to Patreon and consider supporting the channel yourself. Big shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob Kemp, Talia, Fenrir, Bornstella, Jimbo and Balaz. and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy, with a special mention to the accursed hunter. Shout out to John due to the mathematical formula used to determine the area within a pentadodecahedron. Oh, and Lena because that sandwich. And remember, there are tons of ways to support the channel and keep my installation pumping out content at a breakneck speed. Much love to you all, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.